Rain poured like broken glass against the city's cold pavement. The night had long swallowed the sun, leaving only the glimmer of headlights slicing through mist and noise. Near the corner of an old market, a little girl crouched under a flickering street lamp, her bare feet trembling against the wet stones. She held a handful of uncooked rice, pressed close to her chest as if guarding a treasure. "Please, I'll return it tomorrow," she whispered, her voice trembling like the rain itself. But no one heard her. The shopkeeper had shouted, people had stared, and then she ran. Her name was Lila, barely 9, with tangled hair and eyes that once held laughter. But hunger steals laughter quickly. Tonight it had stolen her courage too. Not far away, a black car idled by the curb. Inside sat Ethan Vale, a man whose name was known across boardrooms and news columns, the kind of man who could buy a city block with one phone call. Yet for all his wealth, his gaze that night seemed empty. He was supposed to attend a charity gala, but the idea of champagne and speeches had lost its meaning. So instead, he watched the rain. That's when he saw her. The girl stumbled, clutching her stolen rice, tears lost in the storm. People passed her, some shaking their heads, others pretending not to see. But Ethan couldn't look away. Something in her small, trembling frame struck deep. A memory, maybe, or a guilt he'd buried long ago. He stepped out of the car. The rain met his face like cold truth. "Hey," he said softly. Lila froze. Her tiny fingers tightened around the rice. "I didn't mean to steal," she stammered, backing against the wall. "Mama's sick and we had nothing left." Ethan's heart thudded. Those words pierced sharper than the rain. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not here to hurt you." But she didn't trust him. Not yet. Hunger makes you suspicious. She looked at his shiny shoes, his expensive coat, and thought, people like him don't talk to girls like me. He slowly knelt so their eyes met. "You said your mom's sick?" She nodded, tears mixing with the rain. "She hasn't eaten for 2 days. I just wanted to make her rice. Just once." Something inside him cracked. Years ago, he too had known what it meant to lose someone. His mother, gone too early while he was still too poor to save her. He'd built an empire since then, but some wounds money never heals. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's go somewhere warm." Lila hesitated, glancing back toward the market, expecting another yell, another punishment. But instead, there was silence. Only the man's hand extended, waiting. She placed her tiny palm in his, trembling, and the world suddenly felt a little less cruel. They walked toward the car. Rain slid down her arms, glimmering against her fragile skin. For the first time that night, Lila dared to hope. "Before we dive deeper, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me how far a single story can travel. Drop your city. Let's see how wide kindness still spreads." Inside the car, warmth wrapped around her like a soft blanket. Ethan handed her a towel and a chocolate bar from the console, one he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. She stared at it, hesitant. "It's for you," he said. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. The first bite made her eyes widen, not just from sweetness, but from disbelief. For her, chocolate was a dream. He watched in silence, the corners of his lips trembling. "Where do you live, Lila?" "In the back of the laundry shop," she murmured. "The owner lets us stay after closing. But Mama can't stand for long anymore. She used to sew clothes. Now she just sleeps." He swallowed hard. He'd seen poverty in reports, in headlines, in speeches at charity dinners, but sitting beside it, seeing it shiver and smile through tears was different. It was real. The driver turned, confused, but Ethan raised a hand. "Drive to Willow Street Clinic," Lila blinked. "Why are we going there?" "Because no child should beg the rain for mercy," he said quietly. "And no mother should starve while her daughter steals rice." The car moved through the downpour, slicing through puddles that reflected the dim light of the city. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, not in fatigue, but in shame. He'd spent years chasing success, yet he'd forgotten the reason he'd wanted it, to make sure no one else suffered the way he once did. He looked at Lila again. Her small hand still clutched the towel. her gaze fixed on the window as raindrops traced slow paths down the glass. She didn't know it yet, but tonight, her life was about to change. The car rolled to a quiet stop in front of the small clinic. The neon sign above flickered, casting tired light across cracked walls. Ethan stepped out first, opening the door for Lila as though she were someone important. She blinked up at him, uncertain whether to trust this kindness. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and hope, the kind that often fades too soon. A sleepy nurse looked up as they entered, surprise crossing her face when she saw the little girl's soaked clothes and the well-dressed man beside her. "She needs help," Ethan said simply. "And so does her mother." The nurse nodded, calling another attendant. Lila's small hand tugged his sleeve. "Please," she whispered. "Don't tell them I stole. I swear I won't do it again." Her voice was so fragile it almost broke him. "I promise," Ethan said, kneeling to meet her eyes again. "No one's angry, Lila. You did what you had to do." Her tears fell freely now, not from fear, but from release. For the first time, someone wasn't scolding her. Someone believed her. They led her mother in shortly after, a frail woman with hollow cheeks and skin pale from hunger. Her name was Maria. When she saw Lila, her eyes widened with panic, until the nurse gently reassured her that everything was okay. Ethan stood quietly at the door, watching the reunion. Lila climbed into her mother's arms, whispering, "I brought food, Mama. The nice man helped." Maria's lips trembled. "You shouldn't have stolen, my love." "I know," Lila said softly, her gaze dropping. "But I was scared." Ethan stepped forward. "No one's judging her," he said gently. "Let's focus on getting you better first." The nurse prepared an IV drip while Ethan handled the payment discreetly. When the clerk saw the amount, her eyes widened, but he only shook his head. "Make sure she has everything she needs." As he waited in the hallway, memories clawed at him, of nights when he'd watched his own mother fade under the dim light of a single bulb, pretending not to be hungry so he could eat. He'd promised her he'd become someone who could change lives, but somewhere along the road to success, he'd buried that promise under meetings, profits, and silence. Tonight, a little girl's stolen rice had reminded him. He leaned against the wall, the sound of rain outside echoing in his ears. When the nurse returned, she smiled. "They'll be fine for tonight. She just needs rest. And food." "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He peeked through the door one last time. Lila was curled beside her mother, holding her hand as if guarding it from the world. Her small frame rose and fell with calm breaths, something close to peace. He turned to leave quietly, not wanting to disturb them. But just as he reached the door, a small voice stopped him. "Wait," Lila whispered. He turned. "Thank you," she said. Her eyes glistened, reflecting the clinic's dim light. "No one ever helped us before." Ethan smiled, the kind that hides pain behind warmth. "You don't have to thank me, Lila. Just promise me one thing." She tilted her head. "What?" "Keep believing that good people still exist, even when the world feels empty." She nodded slowly, her tiny fingers waving goodbye as he stepped into the rain once more. "If you were there in that moment, what would you have done? Be honest, comment your answer below. And if words fail you, just hit like to prove that compassion still matters." Back in his car, Ethan couldn't shake her voice. Every word echoed louder than the city's noise. He glanced at the raindrops chasing each other down the window and wondered, how many children were out there tonight doing the same thing? How many hands reached for food, not knowing help could ever come? He took out his phone and stared at the company logo glowing on the screen. Vale Industries, the empire he had built from nothing. For years, he had been too busy chasing numbers. Maybe it was time those numbers started saving people instead of just impressing investors. He opened a new note and began typing, his fingers moving fast. Project Hearth, a foundation to provide meals for every homeless child within the city by winter. The words looked simple, but to him they felt like redemption. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. Inside the clinic, a little girl slept peacefully, unaware that her small act of desperation had just lit a fire in the heart of a man who'd forgotten what it meant to care. And somewhere in between them, hope quietly returned. The next morning, sunlight slipped gently through the blinds of the small clinic room. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed and quiet. Lila stirred awake, blinking at the pale ceiling, confused for a moment, until she saw her mother sleeping peacefully beside her. The IV bag was half empty, and Maria's color had returned slightly to her cheeks. A nurse entered quietly with a tray of breakfast, warm soup, bread, and a little bowl of rice. Lila's eyes widened. Real food. She touched the spoon like it might disappear. "For you and your mom," the nurse said kindly. "Courtesy of Mr. Vale." "Mr. Vale?" she repeated, tasting the name like a word from a dream. The nurse smiled. "The man who brought you here. He paid for everything and left early this morning. Said he had something important to start." Lila turned toward the window, where soft light kissed the glass. Somewhere out there, the man in the expensive coat was moving through another world, one she couldn't imagine, but he had paused his life for hers. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan sat in his glass-walled office on the 30th floor. Papers spread before him. His assistant, Grace, looked at him curiously. He had canceled his meetings and instructed the finance team to prepare a proposal no one expected. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, glancing at the figures. "It's a lot to divert." "I'm sure," he said, his gaze steady. "This isn't charity, Grace, it's correction." She hesitated, then nodded. She'd known Ethan for years, known his cold efficiency, his relentless focus. But today his voice carried something different. Humanity. By noon, Project Hearth had a name, a mission, and its first location, a renovated warehouse near the East End, where hundreds of hungry children often gathered by the dumpsters. It would be a community kitchen, run daily, serving meals, no questions asked. Ethan walked through the half-empty space that afternoon, dust swirling in sunlight beams. He imagined tables filled with laughter instead of silence. For the first time in years, his chest felt light. Yet as he stood there, something tugged inside, a thought he couldn't ignore. He didn't want to just fund it. He wanted to see it, to make sure it was real. That night, he returned to the clinic. Maria was sitting up now, her face thin, but her smile alive. Lila was beside her, carefully folding a small paper crane she'd made from the food wrapper. When she saw him, her eyes widened with surprise and joy. "You came back," she said, hopping down from the bed. "I promised I would." He smiled. "How's your mom feeling?" "Better," Maria said softly. "We owe you everything," he shook his head. "You owe me nothing. You've already given me something I didn't know I'd lost." Lila tilted her head. "What's that?" "A reason," he said quietly. For a moment, none of them spoke. Outside, the city buzzed faintly. Cars, voices, life. Inside, there was only the warmth of that small room and the fragile thread that now connected their worlds. Lila fidgeted with the paper crane. "Can I give you this? So you don't forget us." Ethan smiled, kneeling to take it from her tiny hands. "I won't," he promised. "Have you ever had someone help you when no one else would? Write yes and tell me their name. Maybe gratitude can travel further than we think." Over the next few days, news began to spread. Quietly at first, then like a spark catching fire. Photos of Ethan Vale standing in the rain beside children, helping serve food at a temporary kitchen, filled social media. People who once called him distant now saw something else. A man trying to make amends. But for Ethan, it wasn't publicity. It was purpose. Each bowl of rice, each smile, felt like healing. One evening, as volunteers packed up, he noticed a familiar figure by the doorway, Lila, in a clean blue dress someone had donated. She ran toward him, her eyes shining. "Mr. Vale! Mama's working now! The nurse helped her find a job at the sewing shop." "That's wonderful, Lila." He knelt, smiling. "You see what happens when you don't give up?" She nodded proudly, then looked serious. "Can I help too?" "I can clean the tables." He laughed. "You already helped more than anyone, Lila. You started all of this." She frowned, confused. "Me? Yes," he said. "It all began with you. And a handful of rice." Her little mouth formed an O, and then she smiled. That kind of smile that only children who've known pain can give. Bright because it's fought for, Ethan stood, glancing across the room full of life and noise. For the first time, his world wasn't made of glass and steel. It was made of warmth. And somewhere deep inside, his mother's voice echoed, "If you ever find someone starving, feed them, and you'll feed your own soul." The weeks passed gently, like sunlight returning after a long storm. Project Hearth became more than just a building. It became a heartbeat in the city. Each morning, lines formed outside the glass doors, tired mothers with their children, old men clutching photographs, and teens who'd forgotten what kindness looked like. Ethan made it a rule to visit every day he could. No cameras, no press, no speeches. Just sleeves rolled up, ladling soup, handing out rice, smiling as though he were home. Lila was there too, always. She had become the unofficial little helper, her hair tied with a pink ribbon one of the volunteers had given her. Whenever new children arrived, scared or shy, she was the first to greet them. "Don't worry," she'd say proudly. "This place is magic. You'll never be hungry here." Ethan often watched her from afar, amazed by how someone who had so little could give so much joy. There was a purity in her laughter that reminded him what humanity truly meant. One day, as he helped set the tables, Grace approached quietly. "Ethan," she said, her tone softer than usual, "we received an offer today. The investors want to expand Project Hearth nationwide, but they're asking if you'll go public, make it a media initiative." He paused, staring at the steam rising from the soup bowls. "They want to make it business again," he murmured. Grace hesitated. "They say it'll inspire others." He looked at her, the corners of his eyes tired but kind. "Then let's do it our way. Tell real stories, not numbers. I don't want a campaign. I want a movement." Grace smiled faintly. "You've changed, Ethan." He shook his head gently. "No, I just remembered who I was." Meanwhile, across the room, Lila was helping an elderly man carry his tray. The man's hands shook and a bit of soup spilled. She giggled, wiping it quickly. "It's okay. We all make messes." The man's eyes softened. "You remind me of my granddaughter," he said. "She's gone now." Lila reached for his hand without thinking. "Then you can share mine." Ethan caught that small exchange and felt his throat tighten. It wasn't charity he was seeing anymore. It was connection. The kind he'd lost somewhere between ambition and loneliness. That evening, after everyone left, he sat alone on one of the benches. The sun dipped behind the buildings, painting the sky with soft orange hues. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the paper crane Lila had given him. It was a little worn now, but he kept it close. A reminder that hope often starts small, folded from pain. As he looked at it, he realized something. Maybe this wasn't about redemption anymore. Maybe it was about building a world his mother would have been proud of. He stood, walked to the kitchen counter and began scribbling notes on a napkin, plans for new centers, more volunteers, partnerships with schools. He was dreaming again, but this time not for himself. Now it's your turn. Share one small good thing you did recently. Write it below so others remember that humanity still lives. Your story might light someone's path tonight. A few days later, while organizing supplies, Grace handed Ethan a small envelope. "This was delivered this morning," she said. "No name, just your address." He opened it carefully. Inside was a note written in a child's uneven handwriting. "Dear Mr. Vale, thank you for helping my mama and me. We have a little house now near the river. Mama says it's small, but to me it feels like a castle. I go to school again. When I grow up, I want to be like you, not rich but kind. Love." Lila Ethan's eyes stung as he read those words. He folded the note slowly, holding it against his chest. Not rich, but kind. He repeated it softly, as if the phrase itself was teaching him how to breathe again. Later that night, he stood by the window of his penthouse. The city lights blinked below like tiny stars, but his focus was elsewhere, on the little girl who had unknowingly given him back his heart. He whispered to the empty room, "You changed me, Lila." Outside, a gentle wind passed through the city, carrying warmth through the streets, as though kindness itself was spreading quietly, unseen but unstoppable. And somewhere, in a small home near the river, A little girl was looking up at the same sky, whispering a prayer of thanks. Months slipped by, and the rhythm of life began to bloom again. In streets that once echoed with hunger, laughter now filled the air. Project Hearth had multiplied, spreading warmth across neighboring towns. Every new branch carried the same spirit. No one left hungry, and everyone left seen. Ethan traveled often now, not for business meetings or investor deals, but to visit the very people his company used to overlook. His suits were replaced by rolled-up sleeves and work gloves. His boardrooms became kitchens, schools, and shelters. But for all the success, one image always followed him: the little girl standing in the rain clutching a handful of rice. It was late one evening when he returned to the first Project Hearth Center, now glowing under golden lights. Grace met him at the entrance, holding a tablet filled with updates. "Everything's running smoothly?" she said, smiling. "You should be proud." Ethan nodded, though his eyes seemed distant. "Pride isn't the word," he murmured. "I'm grateful. That's all." As he walked inside, he found the walls covered with hand-drawn pictures from children, crayon hearts, rice bowls, smiling faces. In the center hung a large photo of the opening day. Ethan, surrounded by volunteers, with Lila grinning wide at the front. He stopped there for a long moment, fingertips brushing the frame. That night, the volunteers prepared an event, the one-year anniversary of Project Hearth. Dozens of people gathered, singing softly, holding candles. Maria and Lila were there too, dressed neatly, carrying a small bouquet of daisies. When Ethan saw them, a quiet smile touched his lips. "You made it!" Lila ran to him, hugging his leg. "Of course. I told Mama we couldn't miss your party." He laughed gently, resting a hand on her head. "I think it's your party too, you know." The lights dimmed as the crowd began to share stories. Short, trembling voices filled with gratitude. An old man spoke of finding hope after losing everything. A mother spoke of how her children now dream again. And when it was Lila's turn, she stood on the little stage, shyly gripping the microphone. "I used to think rich people never looked down," she said softly, her voice shaking. "But Mr. Vale did. He saw me when no one else did. He didn't just give us food, he gave us a chance. And I promised Mama I'll grow up to help others too. Just like him." The crowd grew still. Ethan looked down, his vision blurring. It wasn't pride that filled him. It was humility, the ache of realizing that one act of compassion could ripple this far. After the applause, Lila ran to him again. "Did I do okay?" He smiled, blinking back tears. "You did perfect." Then she reached into her pocket, pulling out something small and folded, another paper crane. "I made you a new one. The old one must be tired." He took it gently, his hands trembling. "This one will keep me strong. If that moment hit you hard, leave a..." Sometimes one little symbol says what our hearts can't. When the night ended and the candles burned low, Ethan stayed behind to help clean. Grace found him later, still sitting at one of the empty tables, the paper crane resting beside him. "You should rest," she said softly. He shook his head. "You know, I used to measure success by numbers. Now I measure it by smiles." Grace smiled faintly. "You've come a long way." Ethan looked around the quiet hall. "No, we have." Outside, the stars stretched across the sky like scattered hope. He stepped out into the cool air and watched families leaving with full bellies and brighter eyes. For once, he didn't feel like the man who had everything. He felt like the man who finally understood enough. Across the street, Lila waved from her mother's side. "Good night, Mr. Vale," she called. He waved back, voice caught in his throat. "Good night, little one. Sleep full." And as they disappeared into the night, Ethan whispered to himself, and almost like a prayer, "Thank you for teaching me how to live again." The wind carried his words softly, as if the universe itself wanted to keep them safe. Years drifted by, and what began as a small act of kindness had become a movement whispered across nations. Project Hearth wasn't just a foundation anymore. It was a heartbeat shared by thousands. Streets once shadowed by hunger now glowed with the warmth of shared meals, laughter, and hope. Ethan Vale, now older and calmer, no longer sat in corner offices or private jets. His days started early, in simple clothes, surrounded by people who once thought they were invisible. His hair had silvered, but his eyes, those same eyes that once looked down from glass towers, now looked around, always searching for another soul to lift. He often thought about that afternoon at the park, the rain, the empty plates, the quiet desperation that had changed everything. It was strange how one fleeting moment could rewrite an entire lifetime. One morning, as he was reviewing reports in the small community kitchen, Grace approached him with a familiar spark in her eyes. "You might want to see this," she said, handing him a letter. The envelope was old-fashioned, sealed with a small sticker shaped like a paper crane. Ethan's heart caught. Carefully, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Vale, you once found a little girl pretending to eat. Because of you, that little girl now feeds hundreds every week. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." Lila, he froze, the paper trembling in his hands. Beneath the note was a photo. Lila, now a young woman, standing before a small sign that read Hearth House, founded by Lila Rose. Behind her were smiling children, bowls in hand and the same spirit in their eyes that had once lived in hers. Grace smiled gently. She opened her own center. "Says it's her way of keeping your promise alive." Ethan couldn't speak. For a long time, he simply stared at the photo, his chest tight with a mix of pride and something deeper, something sacred. Finally, he whispered, "She did it. She really did it." Grace sat beside him. "You gave her a spark." She turned it into fire. He chuckled quietly, wiping a tear that escaped despite him. "Seems she's better at this than I ever was." Later that day, Ethan visited the park, the same one where it had all begun. The benches were painted now, the grass trimmed, children laughing where rain once fell cold. He sat down on the same worn spot under the oak tree and pulled out the old paper crane, now faded and fragile. He placed it on the ground beside him and whispered, "You kept your promise, little one." The wind stirred gently, lifting the paper just enough to flutter, as if nodding in reply. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Ethan smiled. A small, knowing smile of a man who finally understood the full circle of grace. For kindness, he realized, was not a moment. It was a legacy. Sometimes the smallest act can echo through generations. Share your thoughts. What moment changed your life? Emotional story. Kindness changes lives. Rich vs poor. Heart-touching story. Inspiring tale. Moral story. Billionaire and girl. Humanity. Still exists. Faith in humanity. Short film. The evening air was golden, soft, gentle, the kind that carried memories in its breeze. Ethan sat in quiet stillness, his thoughts drifting between past and present. The sound of children's laughter in the distance was the sweetest symphony he could ask for. He thought about the years he'd wasted chasing numbers, wealth and applause that never filled the emptiness inside him. The irony wasn't lost on him. A billionaire who had everything, yet learned life's richest lesson from a hungry child with empty plates. Grace joined him on the bench again, holding 2 cups of tea. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "I've just been remembering." She looked out across the park. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "What you built." He shook his head. "What we built. What she inspired." Grace smiled, that warm, knowing smile of someone who had seen a broken man rebuilt piece by piece. A small group of kids ran past them, one of them dropping a folded paper crane. Ethan bent to pick it up, unfolding it with trembling hands. Inside, in messy handwriting, were 3 words. "Thank you, stranger." He closed his eyes. The moment was so simple, yet it broke something open inside him. "If you were there in that moment, what would you have done?" He whispered softly, the words almost carried by the wind. "Would you have walked away? Or stopped?" He turned to Grace again. "You know, I used to think saving someone meant giving them money. But now I know. It means giving them a chance to believe again." Grace nodded. "And you gave her that," he smiled. She gave it back to the world. As the sun set completely, the park lights flickered on, one by one, like stars being born on Earth. Ethan took a deep breath, letting the peace settle into his heart. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a letter, not for business, not for charity, but for someone who had once changed his entire view of humanity. He began to write, "Dear Lila, I kept your first paper crane all these years. It reminded me of who I used to be and who you helped me become. You once said you'd never steal again. You didn't just keep that promise. You turned it into hope for others. Thank you for teaching me that forgiveness can feed more souls than money ever could. With love, Ethan." He sealed the letter and smiled faintly at Grace. "I think I'm finally done running." She looked at him, understanding. "Maybe you're finally home." The night grew quiet, filled only with the soft hum of life around them. Ethan leaned back, eyes tracing the stars. Somewhere, he hoped, a little girl, now a woman, was looking at the same sky, smiling too. Sometimes redemption didn't come with applause. It came with silence, peace, and the sound of laughter carried on the wind. If you believe love still wins, comment, Amen. Let's fill this section with hope. Maybe someone scrolling right now needs to see it. Heart-touching story. Kindness lives on, faith in humanity. Richmond Poor Girl. Inspiring stories, cinematic tales. Emotional narration, modern parable, true humanity. Life lessons days later, Ethan stood outside Hearth House, the community center Lila had founded. It was buzzing with life, laughter spilling from the windows, the smell of fresh bread, and music played softly by a group of volunteers. He paused before walking in. His reflection in the glass door caught him, older, lined, but finally at peace. The security guard smiled. "You must be Mr. Vale. Lila's been expecting you." Inside, the walls were covered with children's drawings, bright colors, smiling suns, tiny hands outlined in paint. And in the center of it all, arranging plates on a long wooden table, was Lila. She turned when she sensed him, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of deep, unspeakable gratitude. "Mr. Vale," she whispered. "I didn't think you'd come." He smiled gently. "How could I not? You invited me every day with what you built here." They walked together through the hall, children waving and giggling as they passed. On the wall near the kitchen hung a framed photo of that rainy afternoon, a little girl, a paper crane, and a stranger kneeling beside her. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Kindness doesn't ask who you are. It just shows up." Lila turned to him, her voice trembling. "Do you ever regret it? Helping me that day?" Ethan looked around, at the full tables, the happy faces, the warmth that filled every corner. "Regret?" He smiled softly. "That moment saved my life." For a long moment they stood there, two lives forever bound by one act of compassion. Lila reached into her pocket and handed him a small, folded note. "For you," she said. He unfolded it slowly. It was another paper crane, this one neatly made, with a message written across its wings. "Because you believed in me, I learned to believe in others." He couldn't hold back the tears this time. "You did more than I ever could," he whispered. She smiled. "No, Mr. Vale, you just gave me a reason to start." As the evening light poured in through the tall windows, Ethan felt something release. The weight he had carried for years lifted, replaced by a quiet, steady joy. He knew now that redemption didn't come from wealth or power, but from the courage to care when no one else does. He turned toward the door, the sound of laughter fading behind him. Outside, the wind was soft, the sky painted in gold. Ethan lifted the paper crane, letting it go. It soared upward, catching the sunlight as it drifted into the endless blue, a symbol of grace set free. Sometimes, he thought, the smallest kindness becomes the greatest legacy, and in that single moment, the world felt healed, if only a little. If this story moved you, don't scroll past quietly. Tap like. Not for me, but for the soul who carried this pain and still stayed kind. One click can be your way of saying, I felt you. Emotional story, heart-touching tale. Rich man, poor girl, your kindness is power, a faith in humanity. Forgiveness and hope, inspiring ending. Humanity lives, each short film narration, emotional cinematic story.